to GovConHacks. I'm Ashley Duwel,
And I'm Natasha Velez with NBS.
and we are back with another topic for you guys. This has been mass confusion as far as who do you really need to know in the government? There we hear buzzwords, contracting officer, program manager. Well, what do they even do? So I have five for my list. And then if with whatever time we have left, we'll go ahead and get into who are other key people that you should kind of have, essentially, whether they're on your team, in your arsenal, or just be for awareness, essentially.
Mhm.
So the first one, I'm gonna say one, I'm just gonna get it out of the way because I don't think it's the most important one. So, and one we probably all know because literally everyone thinks that they need to talk to this person and they think that they need to talk to them today. Can anyone who's joining us in the audience guess who I'm going to say first? All right. Well, we have no guesses yet. Contracting officer. Um,
Yeah.
but the why, like, okay, so the contracting officer does have the authority to enter into, administer, and terminate contracts on behalf of the government. Um, they ensure the procurement process complies with the FAR, the Federal Acquisition Regulations. What they don't do is they're not technical people, right? So, they're not necessarily formulating the requirements and making the determination on what the needs are. They're doing the checks and balances part of the process, right? I mean, is there anything else that you would add to that as far as, who they are and who they aren't?
I think we only know of the contracting officer. So that is definitely the buzzword. And when you're not familiar with federal contracting, it's the only one you kind of stick to. But believe it or not, they don't know everything. So they aren't the technical. They're just the ones like that are in charge of this particular project and making sure that you have, they have a vendor to fulfill that need, but they're not the person that came up with the need or anything of that magnitude. So they can answer questions in regards to like a solicitation and help you in that regard. But they also can be a connector to the people that you do need to speak to, but they're not the end all be all. There's so much more going on in the background. So I would say that they are literally just, the middleman. Right. That's a really great word these days. So
Good
that's
answer.
what they are. That's what they are, essentially.
And really, when you think about, oh, I've got to build relationships, I've got to reach out, I need decision makers. I mean, essentially, yes, but there's a time, I firmly believe, to reach out and a time not to reach out to a contracting officer. Because what
Yeah.
the reality is, you got to understand your buyers. You have to relate to your customer, right? And you've got one CO doing the job of probably at least four by now, right? And
Mhm.
what consumes their day to day are the requirements that are on their plate because all formal contract actions and all amendments have to go through the CO. Nobody but the CO is allowed to sign off on that work. So, I always hear a lot of complaints from contractors about our number two, the COR. Believe it or not, the COR is not supposed to be adding on to your scope of work, right? That needs the CO's final approval. But
Yes.
the COR is appointed by the contracting officer to oversee the technical aspects of the contract. So they usually do end up being your primary point of contact and the human that you interact most often throughout the duration of that contract. Any other differences that you can
No,
pinpoint?
I think you nailed it pretty spot on there.
Yeah, they're pretty much the one that you report to.
Hmm.
If there's a problem, they're going to either take care of that on behalf of the contracting officer, or pull them in as needed. But they're probably more so who you're going to have more interaction with as
Yeah,
part of the performance and the reporting, right?
I would agree.
All right, you want to take the next one?
I will say program and project managers. Ultimately, they are the ones that oversee different projects and programs that the industry of their agents, well, the agency that they're part of, has, and they're the ones that can provide insights to you. They can kind of give you some insight into upcoming projects, budgets, specific needs, any new contracts that are coming. And those are the ones that after you kind of review a pre-solicitation or an acquisition, um, or something that's forecasted, you can kind of reach out to them and get some more clarity. So this is more like into the capture stage, but these people are super important because they're the ones that the contracting officers and the CORs do look to for new programs and to go ahead and develop those solicitations that you eventually see in sam.gov.
Absolutely. And to add to that, oftentimes your program manager is your end user, right?
Yeah.
So the program manager, let me kind of take a step back because in the contracting process, your awarding agency may or may not be your funding agency, and your funding agency is your customer. So you may be misinterpreting the data if you're targeting the awarding agency. So making sure that you have an idea, sometimes they're the same, right? Sometimes the
Yeah.
awarding agency is the funding agency, they're buying their own stuff. But in a lot of cases, those two are separate, right?
Yeah.
It's very common in the military. But nonetheless, knowing who's who, because the contracting officer that's making the decision ultimately is taking the influence from the end user, which may or may
Yes.
not be the same agency. So when it comes to figuring out what your customer's pain points are, you have to identify your customer to be able to know, okay, which program manager, who's in that procurement office, who heads up that team, right? Because they're going to be the ones that are going to tell you, what's going wrong with the existing contract if you're lucky enough to, build that kind of
Oh,
rapport.
yeah.
They're not the ones, though, that you want to go out with a sales pitch. Don't just send your capability statement to a program
Oh, yeah.
manager.
That's not them at all.
Not many COs appreciate that either, from my experience. They usually just pass you off to our next one. And the last two are very similar in function. A lot of folks think that they are one and the same, but they're not, and we'll kind of explain the differences. But you have your small business specialists, right? And
Your SPLMs.
I'm gonna explain these together. And then you have
Mhm.
your small business liaison officers, right? So
Yep.
to differentiate, the SBLOs are at the highest level of government. So they would be at your department level in the Office of Small and Disadvantaged Business Utilization. So they are essentially there, they act as traffic directors. But these last two, the specialists and the liaisons for small businesses, are literally there to act as just that, a liaison between their procurement office or their OSGBU department and industry, right? So everybody knows about the small business program,
Yeah.
your WOSB, your BOSB,
Hmm.
SGBOSB, 8A, and the goals that are associated with each of those factors. So these roles, believe it or not, now I'm showing my age in this space, but when I first started, there was no such thing as a small business specialist. I mean, the contracting officers were pretty much all,
Everything.
and they did not really talk to you because they were literally inundated with everything
Mhm.
under the sun. It was a way different time back then, though. But these small business specialists have been instrumental to me when executing strategies for my clients, whether it was like one time I got a spreadsheet of all the IT program managers in the entire agency. So, like, this was right during COVID. When COVID began, nobody was really buying anything except gloves and masks, right? So,
Yeah.
IT spending died down, everything kind of went quiet
Yeah.
for a little while. So, I had a lot of conversations with a lot of government employees during that time, and the small business specialists provided me what I needed to kind of get my intel gathered and execute that capture. So typically, it's very common when you reach out to these guys. Like, what's your experience reaching out to any of these five that we're talking about today? What's the typical response that you get? Or have you found something that works?
Typically silence, but I am also very annoying. So I will follow up with not my first thing is my capability statement. My first thing is an opportunity that I've identified. They usually like it better when you don't just reach out and have nothing to offer other than your CAPE statement. I usually come up with an opportunity, want to have a conversation, possibly, a briefing. Can we have a meeting? Obviously, based on your time, you let me know when you're available and I'll make time for you. And then ultimately kind of put throw in the acquisition number or that solicitation number, whatever that looks like, and just kind of insinuate how I can help on certain things and introduce myself. And ultimately, the goal is
Right.
that, I don't want to put any pressure on them, right? Because we all feel that pressure as business owners. We want them to give us a contract, right? But that's not how it works. Yeah, the business it's a long game, right? It's in for the long run. So it's building that relationship with them and saying, hey, this is who I am. And having a face to the name and introducing my company and our core capabilities. And that has worked when I'm not so quick to say, notice me now,
Right.
and just be patient.
You throw everything at
Yeah.
them, but the kitchen sink, and then hope that
Yes.
something sticks. And I talk a lot and I preach, I get on my soapbox about targeted marketing.
Hmm.
Not everybody needs to know every little thing under the sun that you do,
Yes.
right? Um,
Or you're willing to do.
Having the right conversation with the right person. And something that you said, I'd like to kind of piggyback on because you mentioned, um, when you have something to talk about, essentially. And I want to like unpack that a little bit because I know that we probably have some audience members who are rather new to this that are probably sitting there scratching their heads thinking, well, they're not allowed to talk to me once it becomes a solicitation. So, how do I talk to a contracting officer about an opportunity after the acquisition process has started? And I want to point out here that the answer to that is you got to get in before it
You do.
ever sees the light of day on Sam. You
Yeah.
know, and we could do an entire episode just on the acquisition process itself, but
We probably will.
we probably will. Let's put that on the list.
But you
Um,
have to, you do.
you
I
do,
agree with you
yeah.
on that. It is so like when you're speaking with them, you already know that they cover your NICS code, they cover, an opportunity that you would have liked to have bid on and been able to at least influence. So who's to say they don't have like another 10 in their belt that's coming along soon? So you still want, again, it's about the long term because immediate wins are 10, 15, 20. But if you want to be a millionaire, billionaire, it's about the long game. And sometimes you're putting in a year to 2 years of a relationship with a federal contractor or with a contracting officer or their project managers and their program managers and their SBLOs. And you honestly, they introduce you to everybody in most cases. Um, they'll do like a whole briefing and have you, meet with their program managers and
They'll
see if you can,
facilitate the meeting,
they will
right?
facilitate it.
They will
They'll look at your
facilitate it.
capabilities and connect you. I mean, but you have to provide the value, that
And
added
here's
value.
the difference, really. So let's take contractor A.
Hmm.
Contractor A emails, Mr. Contracting Officer, we're an SDVOSB, WOSB, 8A, SBA certified, DBE. Here's our
I've got all the
capability statement.
acronyms.
What do you think that contracting officer is literally thinking? So what? Like, so
I don't
what? I
care.
mean, good
I don't
for
care.
you, but what does that have to do with me, right? But if you approach a conversation saying, we've reviewed your agency forecast, you're listed as the point of contact on solicitate or on opportunity ABCD. We have a
Mhm.
few questions. We'd like to learn a little bit more about it. Do you have time Wednesday or Thursday for a capability briefing? We won't take too long.
That's it.
Just stop talking, right?
Yeah.
Always end in a question. I always say because the human is responsive, like when we're asked a question, it's in our nature to want to answer said question.
Yeah.
So ending in a question definitely gets a better response. But you got to have something of substance to talk about.
Yes. I
I mean,
would
there,
definitely make it. And that goes back to what you said. Um, knowing your customer, knowing what it is that they need from you and want from you and what their pain points. And the only way you can do that is by doing your market research and by attending events that they're at and they're speaking at. For instance, that reminds me, we went to the engineers, I think it was the Army of Engineers
Mhm.
event.
Oh, I remember
Half
that.
the pain
That's cool.
points they mentioned, I didn't know existed. until I went to the event and I sat there and I listened. And they openly discussed how they needed more companies that had engineering for innovation. They were upgrading and doing construction, and they needed these and this and that and this and that. And it was just amazing. It was just like a wealth of knowledge that I never would have gotten if I would have sent just an email. I would have gotten probably silence until they had time to answer me. But that was there. And I was there. I got the information and they were right in front of me. So I was able to like meet with them and shake their hand and introduce myself and then follow up with, hey,
Strong
we
follow-up
spoke,
game.
right? A strong follow-up. Um, so those moments are invaluable, but knowing your client, like researching them, and granted, I call it stalking, but in business, you have to thoroughly be there to solve. Internally, we all know that we want to serve our own purpose, right? We want to have these
Our
great
business,
careers.
right?
We want to make the sale, right? But in externally, you have to know that the best salesperson is the one that makes their client their first and their foremost. And if you understand them and speak less of your solution and more about their pain points, and they feel like you understand them, again, it is a relationship that is going to help you really narrow down that relationship and build that process and that trust and eventually get into a sale.
Yes, and I mean, here's the thing is the only thing that needs to happen for the acquisition process to start
Mhm.
is a need has to be determined. So, whether it's part of the 70% roughly that they buy over and over and over again, meaning they already know they need it, or whether you come along, identify a pain point, and convince them that they need it, there is literally no difference.
No.
So, having more conversations opposed to spending the time scrolling on
Mhm.
sam.gov is going to give you insight into what their needs actually are, what pain points exist. Um,
Yes.
but if you haven't, and I'm glad you mentioned the market research because I know I preach about that a lot. I'm a huge
You
data
do.
nerd.
I always
Like
throw it out.
we probably do more market research, custom research reports annually for clients than almost anything else.
Yes.
Because A, there's so much data, right? And you don't necessarily need all of it. But you do need to know, even if you identify nothing else, who buys what you sell. When I say who, I don't
Mhm.
mean Department of Labor. I mean which sub-agencies within Department of Labor, and most importantly, which procurement offices and who are the humans that work in those procurement offices, because
Yep.
they're ultimately going to be who you'll need to know. My disclaimer there is unless the funding office is different than the awarding office. And then how? How is important, right? We can spend literally months wasting months of our life sitting around waiting for the perfect opportunity when the industry that we're in maybe doesn't procure from SAM.
Dude, I think that's like that goes into saying like IT, for instance.
Oh, yeah.
I have like a million people that come to me, I have IT. And I'm like, all right, well, that's great, but IT is not just normally a sam.gov kind of thing. You really
Right.
do have to either partner if you have no federal experience whatsoever, or get a GSA schedule, or get on an IDIQ. And I can give you a couple or guac. Like there's a whole different strategy to that. And it's not you just bidding and saying, I promise, because IT is so heavy right now, especially with CMMC and NIST compliances. And us getting hacked constantly. So it's just one of those things where they're not just going to give it to anybody willy-nilly. It has to be like a thoroughbred process. And the only way you can get into that industry, honestly, especially if you have no experience whatsoever, and you're just coming with your certifications into the game, is to partner. And that really does kind of push into your small business liaisons for prime contractors.
Yes, absolutely. Warm introductions, guys. Warm
Mhm.
introductions work magic. So I use LinkedIn a lot. Like if I'm trying to penetrate an agency, I'm gonna go to that person's LinkedIn. Hey, who do we know in common? Maybe ask for an introduction. If I'm in good with a small business person in that agency, I don't need to even bother with LinkedIn. I'm just gonna ask my friend over at CDC or HHS or whatever the case might be because I have an established line of communication. We're not saying you got to take them out for drinks, golfing, and spend all your vacation money on wining and dining because it's illegal to bribe the government. What we are saying though
Mhm.
is put yourself in the rooms that they're in.
Yes.
Make sure that you know who they are. It might require you to travel now and then, and especially in an industry like IT. You
Yeah,
know, it's very competitive.
it
I've
is.
worked with a lot of IT firms who are very successful in the space. I've also worked with some who have all the credentials, the 8A, the GSA schedule, all the things, and they can't get a contract to save their lives.
Yeah.
It all boils down to your internal processes, right? And don't remove the human aspect. And that's why we're having this episode. I wanted to stress because with all this buzz about how much you can win on sam.gov, like everybody's forgetting that the people that are buying on sam.gov are humans, just like
Yep.
you and me.
I
Like
would
just
agree.
like people buy from people they like, essentially. If they don't know you, they're not going to give you something that's high risk. So get in the rooms, ask the questions, and now you know who's who. Let me elaborate on the small business people. If you are brand new and you have never sent an invoice and you don't have a single customer, don't contact the CO. Go straight to the small business people because the small business people will kind of give you they'll they'll give you what you need to do ready or rather to get ready, excuse me, to do business with their agency because I'll tell you, not every agency does business the same, guys.
Yeah.
They have their own processes. They have their own databases, their own requirements, their own supplemental rules. So folks always say, oh, who are my top 10 agencies? And we're like, okay, well, we're not going to tackle all 10 of them this year. Let's
No, focus on
focus
one.
on the ones that we have the most opportunity in. It doesn't have to be the highest spend agency.
Yeah.
Maybe it's the most small business friendly agency. Maybe it's an agency that's having trouble meeting their goals, or is having trouble sourcing contractors for what it is that you do. We just have to kind of find your way in, and doing the market research will give you all the answers to those questions so that when you do enter that room and you do get the PM, the CO, the COR, all in the
Mhm.
room, you're prepared to have an intelligent conversation about an upcoming requirement and not blow the chance you're getting.
Yeah, because you're focusing and you're not leaving it up to them to think of a requirement. You're taking control, you're taking lead, and that's really what you want when it comes to sales. It's a sales game.
Yes.
So if you give them an opportunity, if you've done your homework and you see the task orders and you're like, I can fulfill this, I can fulfill that. I've done this, I've done that. Where have I done this? Have your dates ready, your period of performance, have the type of work you did, who you did it with. If you need to write it down so you don't forget it, especially if it's your first time and you get nervous. But you want to be prepared so that you can lead that conversation because right now you're giving them information of how you can help them versus you sitting there with a handout asking them how they can help you.
Right.
So all of a sudden the cards are on, on the table for you. So I think it's just a better way to approach it. And that's always really helped me kind of reach out because I'm not asking for a handout. I'm coming here and saying, here, I can help. I see that you have this need. I understand what that need is, and I know how to fulfill it. So let's have a conversation. And it's really transactional at that point.
Absolutely. That's great advice. Thank you for that. I know we have a few people joining us online. Does anyone from the audience have any questions about anything we talked about today? These five, we'll call them avatars in the government contracting space, or maybe even experience that you had that you were like, hey, you know what? I reached out to so and so and this happened. Anything, feel free to pop it in the chat. I have had a lot of complaints. Um, folks will ask questions of the CO after the Q&A period, and then they get
Um,
offended that they don't get an answer. So I do think that on a separate podcast very soon, within maybe the next month, we'll have an acquisition process. That way you can see that in each stage of the process, there's kind of like a different action with a different human that would
yeah,
take place to fulfill a capture process,
yeah.
essentially. Um, I have some clients, they spend a meeting, an hour meeting every 2 weeks with a small business person within the agency they're targeting. Now, the small
Hmm.
business specialists, some procurement offices have them, some have them at the agency level. There's really no consistency there. But
Yeah.
the deepest level that you can drill down, that's where you're going to get the most intel. I will
Yeah.
say that.
And
especially in the
again,
smaller
takes time.
offices. Yeah, they're all
Mm-hmm.
involved in formulating these requirements, you know. This person is doing the technical requirements while this person is doing the market research to identify, hey, are there any small businesses that
Yep.
can help fulfill this need to justify setting that aside? So it's not just one person that's the end
I
all be
agree.
all or one title.
And the way you meet these people, again, just don't, only after you've done your market research, you narrowed it down again, not just industry events, but also um, the beneficial relationships that can come from networking at local industry
Yes.
meetings. Like I joined Women in Defense and it was amazing because a lot of the people on the board of the Women's Defense own government contracting companies or for federal agencies. And they know a lot of information that I don't necessarily know. So just hanging out with them and having a cocktail, so much information gets fed and you build this relationship. And before you know it, you leave with like the opportunity to partner on contracts that you never even knew were existed. So do not be afraid to get out there.
It's definitely a little intimidating at first, but um, I've always been a very curious person. Just if I don't know it, like I feel like I'm at a disadvantage. So I've always made it a habit, and it's been very kind to me. I try to surround myself and put myself in rooms where I am not the smartest person in the room. You know, going back to what you said, it's it's enlightening to hear someone else's perspective on the other side, right?
It
And what
is.
better way to do that than at a casual event? There you get on a Zoom meeting and everybody's, messing with their background, stuffy suit and tie. They probably got nothing on from the pants down, but it's just it doesn't give you the opportunity to have a casual conversation,
It's
find
true.
something in common. But when you show
Hmm.
up and you're able to have a cocktail, like Natasha said, you'd be
Hmm.
surprised at what experiences and stories are told that might be able to benefit you in your strategy.
Oh yeah, I would agree. And I think that even I think as a business owner, and this really goes for everybody, humility and that constant mindset of I'm here to learn. And even if you're a master at it, you're never done. Everything
Oh,
changes
yeah,
constantly.
that's
It's
true.
always
We are
evolving.
all
Always.
experts in training, I say,
Yeah,
because,
yeah.
people say, oh my gosh, you know a lot of things about government contracting. I know a little bit about a lot of things,
Yes.
but it's impossible to know everything.
Mm-hmm.
So we're always refining, we're always getting better. Good evening, Delta. Thank you for joining us.
Mm-hmm.
With our last couple of minutes, do any of you have any questions about any of this? I don't see any questions in the chat, and we will get strictly cut off at
I think that was
7:30.
good for today, though.
Yeah, I think that was a good one. Hopefully, we were able to shed some clarity on kind of who's who in government contracting and make sure that you feel confident that the CO is not the only person that needs to know you and that you need to know. And,
Yes.
there's definitely more intel to be gathered from the folks at the end user agency. So
Oh,
keeping that
yeah.
in mind too. All right, everyone. I hope that you all have a great, fantastic weekend, and we will be back here same time next week. Good evening, everyone. Take care.